ladies and gents, Casual Gaming Dad here, and today I finally decided to make a video. I've thought about it over the past couple of weeks, especially since I did finally hit level 100, and I thought about making videos about the end game, which I could give my opinion on a little more updated now after hitting 100 if people were interested. So sound off in the comments if something you want me to do. But I know there's lots of people who do that, lots of people who make build guides and what to do and what to do after 100 and how to prepare for the season. There's so many of those, and so I just felt like, let me do something that I actually enjoy doing and just talk about the Druid, right? So I did finally hit 100, and I wanted to share a little bit about that experience and some of the things that I liked, some of my favorite builds, all the builds I tried, which I tried most of them, not all, but I did try most of them, and also just some of my thoughts and concerns going into season 1, so which is gonna be next week. So let's talk about it. So I kind of stopped keeping track a while ago in terms of the number of hours that I've played since the game came out, but based on some feedback from others and some information that I know, I think a pretty good guesstimate of time that it took me to get to level 100, and mind you, this is after they made the Nightmare Dungeon change. I was level 80 when that change was made, and they roughly quadrupled the experience you were getting from Nightmare Dungeons. So I think it took me about 200 hours from when I started playing the game to level 100. And, it took me about, if you recall my previous video, my review, my discussion, it took me about 40-ish hours for the campaign. I really took my time on that. I wouldn't say I definitely wasn't rushing. So this is definitely more of a casual, playthrough of getting to 100. And it definitely would have taken quite a bit longer if they had not increase the XP in Nightmare Dungeons. I'm not even sure if I would have hit it, to be honest. I'm not sure I would have been motivated to go all the way to 100. So I'm definitely glad they did that. So there's that. Let's talk about, some of my favorite builds. I'll tell you the builds that I started playing when I was leveling up. I did start with Lightning Storm, which is my personal favorite core skill. And that's where I am now, ironically. Spoiler, warning, yes, I am using Tempest Roar, but I'll talk a little more about that later. But I start with Lightning Storm, and then I found the aspect that doubles up on Landslide. So I ended up switching to Landslide for some time, and I did that for a while, and it turned out really good. I felt pretty good. And, so I stuck with Earth for a bit. I tried Pulverize for a little while. I preferred the Landslide with the Trample, which I did eventually find what's up, Rowan? I did eventually find that aspect for the Trample, which is really nice because for Trample Slide you only need those two aspects and to make the build work. So I ended up doing a combination of Trample Slide and Pulverize, actually, and it worked out pretty well. And what's really cool about it is you have some flexibility with different aspects you can choose that you want. Here, let me bring up the skill tree just so you can see that. So basically what you would do is you max out Pulverize and Landslide. I tried multiple different ways to do this. I tried it with the Primal Landslide when I was leveling, and it worked really well. With the Tramples, because I was using Poison Creeper as well to help build up those Terramotes. Eventually, later, I ended up taking out some of those points for more defense, so I took these out, left this maxed, went here to here. I think then it allowed me to free up the Poison Creeper as well, go for more things when I was in bear form, such as more damage reduction. Here with Vigilance, more damage reduction. So as I got higher and higher level, I needed more defense, so I was more focused on that. So it's really interesting to see how the game molds as to your playstyle, to your needs, right? And as you get higher level, you definitely need more defense. So that was some of the changes that I made there. Although I really wanted to play more Lightning Storm, and that was really ultimately what I was going for. So I'm glad that I was able to certainly do that for eventually. But I will tell you that I did not find the coveted Tempest Roar helmet until after level 100. I'll just tell you really quick. This is my unique stash. This was full, and I had extras. So it was, I think, around 55, 56 uniques before I found it. Yes, it's very discouraging. I had 6 of these, 4 of these, 4 barb uniques, 3 of these, 4 or 5 of these. Okay, that's the one I'm using. I'm keeping an extra of some of them. 4 Penitent Greaves, 6 Mother's Embrace, 6 of the Pants, 5 or 6 Hunter's Zenith, 3 of these, 3 Crones, surprisingly only 2 Temerity, 5 Waxing Gibeus, right? So I found so many, and I just could not find the helmet, So what I ended up doing was I ended up playing Lightning Storm anyways, in a different variation without it, so no uniques. So if you want to play Lightning Storm, you can. What I ended up doing was actually a Storm Slide combination. So I did Landslide with Trample, so I used those 2 aspects along with many of the same ones I'm using here for Lightning, right? This one, Runeworker's Conduit, this aspect, Lightning Dancer, and this one here, Overcharge aspect. So I ended up using those with Trample instead of this Grizzly Rage. And then I ended up, instead of here getting damage reduction, I put in the Nature's Fury key passive. And so I was able to just constantly, so I used Earth Spike, Lightning Storm, Trample, Hurricane, and I didn't use an ultimate skill and it wasn't needed. And it worked out really, really well. Until I eventually did find the item, so that's what I did. And I will say it's definitely my favorite. Trample Slide is probably a close second. I think the playstyle and the you get from all the tramples, from the landslides, it just sounds good. It feels good. It was a lot of fun. Earth is really tanky. I will say though, I feel like the pure Pulverize allows you to defense up a bit more, and you'll hit some really big hits. If you like bigger crits, I did do towards the end, my last 5 or 6 levels, I was doing pure Pulverize, and I found a really good weapon here. You can see it's got all of the stats that you want, right? Crowd control, vulnerable, core, crit strike damage with Earth skills, more damage to crowd controlled enemies, perfect roll in the Pulverize aspect. So that I felt was really good in that sense, that it enabled me to just do lots of damage and still be really tanky as a bear. Of course, I was using Basilis and the Insatiable Fury to make myself have more fortify, more defenses, and I found those were a little bit easier to find. So I know there's a lot of controversy and mixed feelings about uniques. I remember feeling that way a bit when I played World of Warcraft and Legion as well, just because it would just feel so bad if you found the unique that you didn't care for or didn't want, and I can understand why it feels that way a little bit in this game. I think they can work on that and fix some of these issues, these concerns with types, that it feels good when a unique drops regardless. Maybe some people made suggestions about maybe just let us roll one of the stats off, because sometimes there's a stat on here that's just not that great. Like look at Poison Resist. I mean, this is a mid roll. I really didn't care though, because I just wanted to find it, so it didn't really matter. But the Max Spirit is fine. The crit damage is fine. Damage rate is fine. But there's no. I hardly consider poison resisted defensive stat. There's no defensive stats on here, so I end up having to go really heavy on all defense here, and all defense here. Right, life, damage damage reduction, fortify, everything defense, right. Same here on the pants, other than movement speed. So we have to make up for it elsewhere, which is both fine and not fine at the same time. I just feel like they could let us roll off one of those stats. It's because sometimes it just, you know, like I'm not using Mad Wolf's Glee. I think I'd rather have more of the defensive stats here, you know, which would be cool if I was always a werewolf. I mean, you're usually a werewolf because of Grizzly Rage, you know, which I know, again, Grizzly Rage build. Ideally, if Unstoppable wasn't such a problem later in the game, I would be using Cataclysm because I just love all the lightning. It's so much fun to play, and it feels so good to click, and just that combined with all your storm from Lightning Storm and your aspects, they're just lightning, and then these passives here, just lightning striking all the time, and it's so much fun. It really is, you know. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different skills now, just for a bit, okay? Maul and Claw. Claw really only has its use, I hate to say it, if you're using the Great Staff of the Crone. Otherwise, it doesn't feel that great. You get the attack speed boost here. Maybe for a poison build, because you want this poison werewolf build, it can be useful, but otherwise, it just doesn't feel that great to click. Even Maul is a bit better because of the Fortify that you get, although I don't really feel like either of these two upgrades are that worth the skill point. I think most of the time I'd rather put it somewhere else, so that's not great. Maybe they could make these a little bit better, maybe up this radius a bit so that I get more Fortify when I hit a bunch of guys. Earth Spike's pretty useful and pretty good for a lot of builds, especially because, well, you get the stun, and then now you get this. They doubled the Fortify here from 4 to 8%, so that's pretty good. Wind Shear has its merits at times. I thought about using it in this build. I think of the Tornado, if I switch this out for Tornado, which it's very easy to do, I would use Wind Shear. In this case, I'm often like not moving and standing still a lot, and this gives me a little extra damage reduction. Storm Strike is overall the best of the 5 starters. You get that vulnerable, right, and that immobilized chance. Here we have a little vulnerable, but then here you have movement speed. So for the Tornado, it's good. You just cast it, you weave it into your rotation, and you get the extra movement speed, so it's nice. Moving on to the core skills, they all have a place. You know, Lightning Storm feels really good for me. Tornadoes for a lot of builds really good. Pulverize, obviously. Shred can be some of the most highest DPS and fastest build in the game. So they all have merits. Some are better for leveling. Of course, there's Landslide again as well. So all 5 core skills for the Druid feel good. They're good. They're strong. They have use. There's builds for them. Here we have extra crit chance, extra movement speed if you want to do just the werewolf, more damage reduction for the bear. So this is all pretty well designed. Even here, sometimes there are builds I've seen where you may want to take abundance for extra spirit generating if you really need to do that. Although personally, I'd rather not have to. If I don't have to, taking extra spirit here is not bad. Wild impulses is just really good if you're using core skills, right? If you're not, if you're doing some builds where you don't feel like that's necessary, or if you just use a basic attack build, like with Staff of the Crone, you don't need to take this, but this is definitely well worth the exchange. Moving down here to the defenses, they all have uses. Earthen Bulwark's really good because it gives you Unstoppable, it gives you Fortify. Of course, there's the innate Earthen Bulwark build, which is 99% gonna get fixed because it's just very unintended. It's busted. It wasn't meant to do that. So I don't know if people will use this anymore. Maybe this just needs a complete rework. I'm not sure, but I think preserving Earthen Bulwark's pretty good. Cyclone Armor I've always thought was pretty good, especially when you're leveling. I often use both of these, unless I'm using a bunch of companions, but this can be really good. Just flat non-physical damage reduction, which is really nice. And then this is really good, preserving Cyclone Armor for additional damage reduction. I've tried this before, which it can be useful again with leveling, but normally later this is much better. Blood Howl is good for healing. You get to use it often when you're killing big groups, and you could generate more spirit. I use it now when leveling. I think this is really good. There are definitely some use cases for here for attack speed, so a lot of these nodes are pretty much worth taking. Debilitating Roar, really, really good in the end game if you want to use it. Huge damage reduction. You can get Fortify, you can do crowd controlling them, you can get a little bit of life heal. I've used both of these. They can be very useful. Ancestral Fortitude, I feel, is just not that great. It says increases your non-physical resistances by 5%. If it said non-physical damage reduction like this, then it would be super good. But it's not. So unfortunately, until resistances are better, this isn't that great. They're just not right now. This is great vigilance, especially later. You don't really need it with leveling, but this is really good later when you're popping these all the time. Every time you pop a defensive skill. Right now I use this a lot. I can just pop this too, so it's very easy to keep this up all the time. The Companions is probably the area of the Druid skill tree that needs the most work. The Poison Creeper, by far, is the most useful. The Wolves, I really would love the Wolves to be better because I have the unique, and I have all the aspects that improve companions, turn your wolves into werewolves, and I'd really love to be able to play a build where I'm fighting alongside my werewolves. Unfortunately, I can't. It's just not good, and it doesn't feel good. If I could do it while leveling, it would probably be a bit more fun, but I can't. And then the Ravens, the problem with them, I feel, is the active ability for the Ravens. It says target area. It's just too small. It's just too, like, the Poison Creepers is more than twice as big. It's much better. So if that radius increased, then we could make a companion build revolving around this that increases your core skills. Maybe like Trample Slide with companions could be really good, but it's just not right now. Nature's Reach is a great passive, though, if you're doing damage to some enemies. So for a lot of builds, this is really good, and it gets doubled. Very easy to crowd control them. Clarity sometimes has its uses if you're using a build where you're shapeshifting into all three forms and you're weaving in and out. Otherwise, I don't find myself using it too much. So this skill tree here, these passives here, and these ones here, it's completely based on whatever you're using. If you're using Storm, you're going to be using these ones more. If you're using Earth, you're going to be using these. These will all be maxed out. Hurricane, ironically, the meme, it's funny. Initially, Rax made that meme, and it was actually really hilarious. But Hurricane is actually a really good skill, and you don't really use it for the damage. You're using it for the crowd control as well as the damage reduction you get when you're close. And as well, when you're using an aspect such as Aspect of Disobedience, it ticks any form of damage. Each time it hits, it's ticking, and it ticks very often. It's going to increase your armor very, very rapidly. So it's really good combination with that. So Hurricane is awesome. Boulder is fun while leveling, pretty worthless otherwise, but it can be fun. There's even an aspect around this to improve it. It just doesn't feel good enough. I'd really like to see them take another look at Boulder to make it considerably worth using. Rabies too. Rabies is okay, but normally you're going to be using Toxic Claw to apply poison to enemies, so you can get this massive multiplier. Probably the best passive the Druid has in terms of damage output. That's why I have 3 on my amulet, because it's just so strong. But I think if you don't have a way to apply poison otherwise, and you don't want to use your Paragon skill tree, which you can as well, this is an intentional way to add poison. So it's not completely useless, and you could definitely, Natural Rabies is pretty good for making it spread really fast, right? So Neurotoxin, you typically only put 1 point here, just to be able to get to Envenom, and as well the Toxic Claws, because crit strikes with werewolf skills will poison enemies, so that's really, really good. Trample is awesome. It feels great. I love the way it feels, it moves. If you're doing Trample Slide, you can max this out too for a lot of damage, especially on bosses. It can do Fortify, it can gain Spirit. It's just a great skill. Mending and Provocation, I've used this before. I put 1 point here just to get to here, and I only put 1 point here if you're doing Earth. This gives you an extra overpower guarantee. The more points you put into it, it goes down in terms of seconds. It goes down to 20 seconds. I tried it, and I can't say I loved it because it didn't feel like Overpower was good enough as a mechanic, so I don't have a big investment into Overpower. But I did try where I did have like almost 500% Overpower damage, and I had 3 different ways to proc overpower, and it was good, but I just felt like it was better to distribute as opposed to go all in on that, if that makes sense. Okay, as far as ultimate skills goes, Petrify, I've seen lots of builds that utilize this. This is really great, especially when you upgrade it, right? Supreme Petrify, you get extra Spirit when you kill enemies. This gives you extra crit strike damage, which is really strong. I think the Crone Trample Slide builds use this a lot, especially for elite packs. Helps you get your Spirit back. Well, actually, you don't need Spirit in that case. But other builds do too. But it just is really good for getting extra crit damage and crowd control. Lots of these passives are good. I really love Defiance. I think this is kind of a must for any Druid build, really. Natural Disaster depends if you apply Vulnerable with Earth skills or you have crowd control with Storm. It's good. Resonance is really good if you're doing a mix, like when I was doing Lightning Storm and Earth. This is really great because it's doubled to 12%. It's just pretty much guaranteed as long as you're rotating, which is very easy to do. And Circle of Life, I used it for a long time, actually. I had it maxed at 3 when your core skills basically just healed you for an extra 3%. With this build, it's not necessary anymore just because we have other ways of healing. We still have Masochistic, the boon, Spirit Boon, and I get 10% healing, you know, when I'm in killing enemies in werewolf form now. So, Cataclysm, it's not used that much, but when I was leveling, I absolutely loved it. It felt so good with Lightning Storm too. Just so much lightning between that and Hurricane and Poison Creeper, and man, I really would love to be able to use this. Unfortunately, I feel really pigeonholed into using Grizzly Rage because of just how much better it has the build flow, the spirit cost reduction, the movement speed, the unstoppable. It's just too good, you know. If they added Unstoppable while your Cataclysm is up, or if they just made Unstoppable not so necessary, but I would be using Cataclysm. It's so sick. I would change my build around a bit. I would love to. Lacerate, not used very much, but I have seen a Uber Lilith killer build that used this, and I'd say that's pretty creative, pretty interesting. Some of these passives here are, if you're using builds where you're shapeshifting very often, you're moving through it, then they can be useful. Otherwise, I haven't used them too much. I did try them though. Grizzly Rage goes without saying, Unstoppable. You get to max Fortify very easily. Some of these passives can be useful if you have extra points. You don't really know where to put them. You can increase the amount of Fortify you get. A chance to get Fortify, crowd controlling. I'm not sure about these two. I don't know if I would use them. I feel like there's just better places to utilize it. Now let's go over the passives, right? The key passives. Ursine Strength. I don't think this will see too much play, but I can see where, because I mean, you're getting a flat 30% damage increase, which is pretty nice, and more life. And I can see this being used at times. I can. I think that it's pretty solid. I don't think you can really complain about that. It's just that some of these key passives affect certain builds a lot more. Bestial Rage. I mean, they improve this. The problem is I mean, look, here we get a 30% damage increase for like Werebear. Here I get a 30% when you're healthy. You're almost always going to be healthy, especially with that max life and all that Fortify with Werebear, because you're going to be tanky. So I feel like here you get the extra. And then I just don't feel like the attack speed and even just the damage is enough. I think they need to add something extra there to make it more worthwhile. But then at the same time, would that make Ursine Strength not as useful? I'm not sure. I'm not sure about this one. I think this one needs a relook, maybe a rework. I don't think it's that good. Lupine Ferocity definitely has its use in certain builds, especially the Staff of the Crone type builds or basic attack builds where you just have really high attack speed. You're guaranteed to get that crit with massive damage increase. And they buffed this a little bit with 60, now it's 70%. I'll get to Earthamite. Perfect Storm, I can see, I could be using this, to be honest, right now. I think that it could be very useful. It would free up an aspect slot. I've considered it. It's hard to turn away from Earth and Might, just for a number of different reasons. But I think that maybe maybe increasing the spirit gain. Maybe make it 2 spirit, kind of like Lust for Carnage does, and maybe increase the damage a bit would make me want to take it more. Nature's Fury is super good. I mean, this, and they made this better. This was 20% chance for each of them. It's 39. It's super. It procs all the time. It is super good. You get that aspect. You get the 8 seconds off, or you can even put on an amulet for 12 seconds. Man, it's super good. I really recommend trying a build with Nature's Fury. It's really fun. It's basically an almost no cooldown type builds, and you don't have to use resources. It's really cool. Earthen Might, definitely the most utilized key passive, especially because of the aspect that makes it so it applies for your storm skills, which I think is really cool. This is just such a great passive. I think it's very well balanced. I don't think they need to change any of these percentages and in these numbers. It works very well. I don't feel it's overtuned. It doesn't proc too often, but it procs often enough where it really can make or break a build, and it's just really great. You know, what else can you say? You get all your spirit back, you get guaranteed crits for 5 seconds, you know, and it's increased. So if you increase your lucky hit chance, which I have in this build, then it's increased when you crit to 10%. You get a max of 10. Or if the target is stunned, immobilized, knockback, which you're very often doing in these types of builds, right? Especially the immobilized. So, really, really good. I think the Druid skill tree is pretty solid. I mean, obviously, I talked about some concerns and some things that could be looked at. I feel like some of these, like, for example, Primal Shred is just so much better than Raging Shred, right? Some of these have extras that just aren't as good. You know, like this one, I think this needs to be like at least 2 additional strikes. I just don't think it's worth taking up the chance to immobilize. So some of these need to be looked at, but overall, pretty happy with my choices while leveling and playing. I'm going to talk about the Spirit Boons really quick. This first row, I really feel like Wariness is easily the best one. Maybe Gift of the Stag if you really feel like you need the extra spirit, but you can get that on gear. And maybe if you have the Heart of Selig, you know, maybe, because you need the extra spirit, it's more life, but this is a very solid damage reduction. All 4 of these boons can be used. Probably the Scythe Talons and Avian Wrath get used the most. I personally have really high crit damage, especially the Grizzly Rage. I don't need to worry about that as much, so the crit chance is more meaningful for me. If you need more tankiness, Max Life right here is pretty good. And in certain builds, the attack speed is definitely very worthwhile using. So pretty solid. I think these need to be looked at again. These all just aren't that good. This one stands out, you know. Pack Leader, sometimes there's builds where it's used. You want to reset some of your cooldowns and companions, specifically the Poison Creeper, right? Energized was really good, especially while leveling, and even later I used it quite a bit when I was tuned with the wolf. Bolster, again, I can see some builds where this is useful, right? You get the extra fortify really fast, which is good, especially maybe like Uber Lilith, you need the extra life, you need the extra fortify, that can be good. Calamity, very good, very useful, especially in builds you want to, if you're using an ultimate skill. Obsidian Slam was pretty busted when it was every 15th kill, and then they made it 20. If you're doing more overpower, it's good. This is one of the other ways besides Pulverize's upgrade to get it. So this could give you a total of 3 guaranteed consistent overpowers besides your 3% base. This one, I think if I'm doing a pure lightning, and if I wasn't using Grizzly Rage, I'd be using Cataclysm. I would be using this, and not Masochistic, of course, because I wouldn't be shape-shifting. Masochistic is super good. Some people think that it's too good. I don't think so. I mean, what are they going to do? Reduce it to 2% maybe? I don't know. I would still use it. I think it's really, really good. It's just fantastic. But it only applies to shape-shifting and critical strikes, so... I mean, but that's why, like, Earthen Might is so good, because then for 5 seconds, every time you hit, you're healing for 3%. It's really, really good. It helps keep you alive. I think this is good where it is. And then Calm Before the Storm. So if you increase your lucky hit chance, you can definitely reduce your cooldown of your ultimate skills by, 6 to 10 seconds normally. So usually when I use Grizzly Rage, it's 35-second cooldown, and it lasts right now 17 and a half because of this, and because of my 5 seconds from my item, but adds another 5 for kills normally. So I'm at 22 and a half, and I'll usually get 2 or 3 procs of this in between, so less than 10 seconds, like 8-ish, depending, between using this. Sometimes if there's lots and lots of guys nonstop, then I'll be unstoppable all the time, but not usually. I'd say usually probably around like 8 or 9 seconds I have to wait between utilizing these, so that's good. So pretty solid around. This top row definitely needs to be looked at though. And so I don't think there's one right way to do Paragon. I have all of the Paragon points, I completed all the Renown, and I'm done, and I'm very satisfied with where I'm at, but I'll just show you kind of what I did. And I think there's a lot of great trees to look at. Earthen Devastation, if you're using Earth skills, is very good. There's a lot of crowd control, increased damage to crowd controlled enemies, crit damage to crowd controlled enemies, a base 30% increase to crowd control. Survival Instinct can be interesting if you're doing always bear form. I personally didn't use it, but I see lots of armor, damage in werebear. So if you're using, for example, Insatiable Fury, it could be something worth looking at. Inner Beast, interestingly enough, there's actually a lot of great nodes on Inner Beast. Like, look at this, attack speed and just damage percentage, just flat physical, which most of the time you're doing physical, right? Crit damage. The legendary node is, there may be some use cases for it. I personally didn't feel it was needed to be taken, and then if you look at my Paragon board, I didn't always take the legendary node. I focused more on getting my 5 glyphs and also just getting some rares, right? And then Ancestral Guidance, very, very good board. I used it a lot, especially with Earth. I felt it was so good with Pulverize because you're just constantly doing that. But in builds where maybe you're not spending Spirit, it's not as useful. Lots of core skill damage, and there's also basic skill damage. So if you're doing a basic skill attack build like Great Staff of the Crone, this is a very, very good tree for that. So what did I use though? So here in my first tree, I got Spirit. Spirit may not be needed because of Grizzly Rage. Just because of the extra crit damage I already have and I gain very rapidly in Grizzly because of a Rampaging Werebeast. Now, if they nerf Rampaging Werebeast excessively, if they cut it in half, I think it'd still be fine to use. If they cut it completely, the crit damage, which I hope they don't do that, but then I'd say keep Spirit. Otherwise, I've thought about, for this build, Fulminate. Extra lightning damage, and you deal lightning damage to healthy and injured enemies, so when they're healthy and when they're low, right? And then I moved in here to our Heightened Malice board. You can see here that I'm not using this, even though there could be an argument for using it with the way that I play currently. But really, I just wanted... I wanted to spread the type of damage that I have and that I use, and not be so focused on one specific type. And I felt that way I was more balanced across different avenues and experiences when I was in a dungeon versus enemies I could crowd control versus not. So if I was too heavy on crowd control, which I was with Pulverize, for example, I'd be doing a lot less damage to bosses. Whereas this was really good because I did extra damage to poisoned enemies, which I'm very often poisoning enemies, damage reduction from them. I liked Earth and Sky here. I get a huge bonus to magic nodes, right? And a little bit of extra damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies, which is very, very frequent. So even bosses could be affected by this. See, look at this. Extra damage to poison enemies because it's more than double, right? So there's so many magic nodes here. I felt this was good. I went there last. Then I went over here to Constricting Tendrils. For a bit, I actually was using Constricting Tendrils to apply poison since I didn't have Tempest Roar. And once I did, I got rid of this. It wasn't needed anymore. But I came here, this is where I put Exploit, of course. I want to put Exploit in the board. Usually it's your third board, whereas the most decks available, I want the most vulnerable damage. Vulnerable damage is really, really strong, right? Extra nature magic damage here and there. Right here, look at that, 30%, right? Making sure I get all these rare nodes. I was able to get the rare nodes even on this tree with the, yes, all of them, right? Yeah, I was able to make sure I got all of them, right? This is the Thunderstruck board. So if I were to switch out from Storm Skills, then I would be switching in Earthen Devastation here or Ancestral Guidance, right? Or both if you want to, instead of one here. And this is Lust for Carnage, right? So this is, what's really great about this is it says Storm Skills. So that includes Lightning and Storm, or anything with attack, Storm. Look at this crit damage and vulnerable damage. I mean, just fantastic, right? More vulnerable damage, I love that. This is increased critical strike damage against vulnerable and immobilized. More critical strike damage. You can see why I have pretty solid. This is where I put my werewolf in. And I did get as much willpower as I could, so I have 85% more damage while in werewolf form. I started taking out some of these points here that I didn't feel like I needed, just enough to meet these node requirements, right? Damage reduction from vulnerable, storm damage, and it's worked really well for me. And this is, I've evolved this as I've played. I've been just fine-tuning. I didn't follow any build guides, so in regards to this, I just fine-tuned it myself. So I think what's great about this is very casual friendly, because I was able to do that. Like if I'm playing a game like PoE, there's no way I'm going to figure this out on my own. It's way too much work, right? So lastly, I went to Lust for Carnage, and really what I wanted was, besides the glyph slot, was Lust for Carnage, because I get to restore some spirit when I'm doing critical strikes, which is very, very often here. I ended up taking out some of the intel, because there's like, what, 1, 2, 3, and I think 4 more. So I got 20 more intel, so I could have gotten 4 times that, so about 36% more damage while fortified. But what I noticed is that I'm not always max fortify. First of all, I have to use Grizzly Rage to get fortify. It takes about 10 seconds to get to that max fortify, and then in order to stay there, I have to be using it constantly, which I very often am, but sometimes in between battles your fortify starts to drop and I'm not. So I'm not always going to start a build, so I have to ramp up. So I took a little bit of that damage out of here. I'm still getting a lot, as you can see, right? I'm not able to get the rares from these. I'd have to, it would take a lot. I feel like I'd have to take away either some defenses or offenses from my gear in order to do so, and I'm just not sure it's really viable or doable, but I did end up just putting some of these points here in Ferocity instead. So I got an extra 10% plus 15% critical strike damage, as well as some more crit damage there. So pretty happy overall. I feel this is very well tuned for my character and for this build. And there's lots of room for flexibility. I thought about going here for more poison, but I thought, you know, this is just overall, they don't have to be poisoned, and crit damage is just very solid, right? So let's take a look at my stats really quick. I have life scales pretty nicely. These are my core stats. I have 39. I'm very comfortable with this amount of crit strike chance. I feel this is very solid, 40%. Very high crit damage, pretty high. I mean, barbs tend to have more, but they have 4 weapons. But notice here I have crit strike damage with lightning and werewolf, so that's another 100%, and that doesn't include the extra bonuses I get from spirit, right? When I'm doing more crits, then they're going to take more damage from me, right? Overpower damage, you see, I took a lot out of here because I just didn't feel like it was really necessary. I mean, it's there. It's extra damage when I do overpower that 3% of the time, but the vulnerable damage, very high. Very, very good. I have it on, I believe, both rings. I don't have it on my weapon, actually, but I needed the willpower to meet some of those rare node needs. So I could have a little more there, but I'm getting extra in other places. And to be honest, I'm getting extra vulnerable damage, too, from a couple of those nodes. So this is very, very high. Very happy with this. This is all damage. You see how I'm like really spread out? Lots of damage, different damage types, different damage buckets everywhere. Healthy is good on the weapon. I like that. Poison, fortified, shapeshifted, werewolf, storm, and then damage with werewolf. So with werewolf skills, right? So these a lot of these are additive, but obviously the multiplicative ones, the crit damage, are really, really strong. My armor is actually higher than this. I'm just not in werewolf form right now. I get extra from the armor. I have a little dodge only, but I have some when I'm with distant enemies, which I like. Fortify bonus, that helps me fortify a little bit faster. Resistances, unfortunately, don't seem that prevalent, although if I go in a dungeon like Blind Burrows, I'll probably use poison resistance. I actually noticed, because the poison in there is really disgusting, and I noticed that it does help a little bit, just not as much as I'd like it to be. I have all damage reduction from elites, damage reduction from vulnerable, damage reduction from close, damage reduction from poisoned, and well fortified. And you can see here as the stat increases, additional bonuses become less effective, so it's better to have it spread out across different damage reduction types. And I have the little extra movement speed, the 22.5% on my boots right here. I have a lot of cooldown reduction. Makes sense, right? You want to have that for just being able to use Hurricane very often. Hurricane lasts 9 seconds, so there's only 5 seconds where it's not up. So I have that up all the time. It's extra damage reduction, extra armor when it's hitting things for Aspect of Disobedience, and a lot of lucky hit too. And again, this procs Earth and Might, among other things, especially because Lightning Storm has only a 19% lucky hit, but it's hitting lots of guys, so that's why it makes sense. It's like Pulverize was like 25, I think, and but Hurricane is 29, so lots of chances to proc there. Even Cyclone Armor 31. Okay, that's pretty much it. Let me see here. Let's just go to a Helltide really quick. I'll show you just briefly how this build works. If you've actually watched this, made it this far, then maybe you're interested to see. But it's very similar to the Tornado Druid build. The biggest difference being I'm not just constantly moving, I'm stopping to do Lightning Storm. And I really like it. Always get a little bit of lag when going into a Helltide initially. Let's go find a nice big group to take out. Helltides, I should say, are probably my favorite type of endgame play. I kind of wish they were a little bit harder, if I'm being honest. Like if they were maybe 5 levels higher into World Tier 4, and then when we get World Tier 5, it'll be 10 levels higher. I think it's just a little bit more scary, a little more challenging. Although, you can't really stand around and do nothing, so maybe I should do an event. Let's see. See if we can find an event. That'd be great. There's only 9 minutes left. Okay, this is a decent amount of guys. So I just do this, and oh, geez. And when there's big groups, you very often want to hold it down. My goodness, what is going on there? You very often want to hold it down. If there's not, you just want to tap. That way it'll do the bolts in a more concentrated area as opposed to spreading them out when you hold it down. So you get used to it as you're playing it. So you can see there I got 7 seconds, 6 seconds left on it until now I'm back up again. So, and you'll notice when I'm not in it because I'll be moving slower. So I move a lot faster, obviously. And I could be moving faster if I was using, you know, Ghost Walker's aspect and whatnot, but you get the idea. Just real quick, because I'm just thinking now, I'm not sure I showed all the different aspects I'm using for this build, but here I'm using the flat damage reduction while shapeshifted in werewolf. Here is the Runeworker's Conduit for all the extra lightning damage. Okay. Never mind. There's